Hello, everyone, and welcome to the Evident Roundtable on Talent. We are thrilled to see so many here from across the industry joining us today. In these events, I just wanted to say we strive to be equal parts briefing and discussion. So to that end, please do shoot across your questions in the chat, and we will get to them both during the discussion, but also towards the end of the session. To help us unpack this very big topic, we're thrilled to be joined today by two leaders in the field. Catherine Savage, partner at EY, leading the People Advisory Services practice, and Noemi Elizam, Global Head of AI at SocGen. I'm just going to hand over to Catherine and Noemi to let them introduce themselves and tell us a bit about how they found themselves at the intersection of talent and banking. So maybe, Noemi, if I start with you.
Thank you very much, Alexandra. Very nice to be with you today. So I am Noemi Elizam. I'm leading the AI strategy for Société Générale for a bit more than 1 year now. And maybe to give you a bit about my background. So I joined Société Générale in 2006. I started working on the risk part, actually, and Société Générale was working in what we call general inspection, so operating general strategic reviews and audits across the group and all the activities. Then I worked for retail banking for a while in charge of managing performance. And then I joined the innovation division in charge of all the digital strategy for the group. So here I had already a very big part of culture and upskilling. And while I included AI in my scope of supervision, this topic of course, AI culture and talent became even more, if possible, at the core of the objective.
Thank you, Noemi. It's fantastic to have you. And Catherine.
Thank you, Alexandra, and equally pleased to be in this panel today on a pretty topical matter. So I'm a partner in EY. I lead our UK FS people consulting business, covering the breadth of the talent agenda and support banking capital markets clients. I've been with EY about 9 years now, but prior to moving into consulting, I spent 20 plus years in banking, in senior HR roles. And so hopefully do consider the practical implications of implementing talent interventions when trying to navigate, I suppose, the disruptions that our workforces are kind of facing today. So I'm quite privileged. I do a lot in the strategic workforce planning space, skills inferencing space, kind of what the invasion of the robot means and that complex ecosystem of managing the human and the machine. So hopefully can bring some good insights to the discussion today.
Well, we look forward to getting into the big discussion, and thank you both so much for joining. We're really thrilled to have you. But before I hand over to my colleague, Colin, I just wanted to a few sort of updates and sort of where we are. Worth mentioning that we're 8 months removed from the last update of the index. As you know, we covered the 50 largest banks in North America and Europe and ranked them on the AI maturity. And we're only 3 months away from the next index update. So maybe we're saying that as the updated metrics will determine the ranking shifts in October, it's very important for us to maybe pull back for a second and provide an updated snapshot of the sector itself, to review trends and also identify the outliers across the 50 banks in the index. But just to say that talent is a critical topic, not only because it's 45% of the weight driving the index, but also because, as we heard at the symposium, many of you here today were part of that a few weeks ago. But as we heard at the symposium, the future success of AI is tied to the talent working on AI. So it's obviously a very important topic for those reasons. And to that end, maybe just to mention that we have just recently published, actually on Thursday, our big annual talent report that was followed by the 2 dispatches that we did on talent capability and talent development. The talent report was published on Thursday. But before we unpack some of these key findings from the data updates, we do need to answer these two critical questions first. What is AI talent and how do we define it? The way we define AI talent is across two distinct pillars in the talent pillar. One is on talent capability, and this includes the analysis of the volume of all employees working across approximately 240 job titles in bringing AI into production. So that whole ecosystem, so that's the whole talent stack of the bank. Who do you have in the bank in that ecosystem, bringing a use case from ideation to production? But we also look at the density, i.e. the number of these employees in proportion to the size of the bank. And the second pillar we look at is talent development. And this includes analysis of visible initiatives that the bank are deploying to attract and retain and develop leading AI talent, also to upskill the rest of the organization. So we look at things like hiring initiatives, training and career development. We look at culture and diversity and so on in that talent development pillar. So what you see on the screen right now is the top 10 banks within the talent pillar as of the last index update, which was November last year. So I'm going to hand over to my colleague, Colin, who's going to walk us through how the data behind the index and the ranking on talent has changed this year, and then bring in our great panelists to discuss the most recent trends. So over to you, Colin.
Thanks, Alexandra. And by way of background, hi, everybody. I work for both Alexandra and Annabelle, leading our intelligence team. So I am really thrilled to present some of the highlights from the key findings of the talent report and bring in the subject matter expertise of our distinguished guests. I used to, in a past life, have a boss and mentor who, whenever we went into a client-facing scenario involving benchmarking numbers, he was always fond of caveating the meeting by, we get this wrong we get this wrong all the time. And I always took a lot of offense to that line because our data was always right. But what I learned with a little bit of age and experience is what he was trying to get at is that any empirical evidence that we present needs to be balanced out by the anecdotal evidence. Does what we're trying to display from the outside looking in, does it meet what the experience on the ground looks like? So again, just a huge thank you to both Noemi and Catherine for giving us that perspective. And while I'm presenting some of the key takeaways, I really want to bring them into the discussion as frequently as possible. So to begin with, I just want to continue on that same vein that Alexandra launched us with regarding definitions, because words really matter. And when we're starting with that first subpillar with regards to talent capability, it's important to review how we define what is an AI role and what's not an AI role. And I think that's actually one of the things that a lot of our customers and the wider banks represented in the index and our partners really struggle with, is this definitional issue that all of our analysis flows from. So with regards to the talent capability stack, Evident defines this in terms of 4 distinct but complementary capability areas. AI development, to put it simply, are the personnel that design and create the AI models and algorithms. Model risks are the personnel that provide supervision that ensure bad decisions do not result from faulty or misused models. Data engineers bridge that gap between AI development and AI-focused implementation, combining, I'd say, a deep knowledge of AI frameworks with serious software engineering chops. And AI-focused implementation, which is the broadest category, are the personnel that help move AI applications and tools from planning and development stages into full production. And so there are examples of over 40 role titles that break down into, hundreds of different variants of the types of people that we're talking about. And all told, when we scan the universe of 50 banks, we identify, over 100,000 people that fit into one of these definitional buckets. But I do want to pause here from the get-go and maybe bring in Noemi to start with, is that I'm curious from your perspective on one of the banks that, not for nothing, is one of the top 10 banks in the index by AI talent volume under this definition. Do you think, like, evidence framework, is it complete? Does this terminology make sense? Does it differ from some of the idiosyncrasies specific to SocGen? And what's potentially missing when we try to fit all of these words onto a single slide?
Thank you, Colin, and congrats, because I think it's not an easy one. You know, I think you have all spent a lot of time to do this effort of taxonomy of the different AI talents that we need and what is and not is not an AI talent. I feel pretty comfortable actually with the taxonomy. I think what is very interesting is to be now very clear on the fact that the AI talents are not only the people who are crafting the model, so maybe the first line, the AI development part, but that, let's say, driving AI at scale in a big bank or organization such as the one I'm working on is really an holistic journey where you will need people working, of course, on the AI development, and these people we manage pretty well to identify them, but then a whole environment without whom it won't never be possible to even scale any use case. So I feel pretty comfortable with the focus you're doing on the governance part. Of course, we are operating on a very regulated environment, which has become both more and more regulated and also more and more differently regulated depending on the geographical areas, which is a very important challenge for us as well. You are doing a focus on model risk, maybe where I will bring a complement in that I see a range of other roles appearing, you know, relative to ethics as well, and environmental footprint, for example, many other roles that are part of a more global AI governance that is being set up. And what we see is that as we are assembling a holistic AI governance in the bank, we need experts of AI within the legal department, within the compliance department, and not only actually within our traditional model risk supervision teams, which were already very strong and were very used to this kind of specific risk. So this is an important one, because really the way I see also the regulation expectation evolving regarding AI is really a holistic approach of risk. So maybe this is where next year or in the upcoming years, we will see a new kind of rules appearing. And then on data engineer and all the architectural part, I can only agree. I think they are a very crucial role to be able to scale any use cases across the board in the organization. And where I really see a very big dynamic, but maybe you will mention that afterwards because it was one of the insights of the report, is really on the AI implementation part of it. So here you're right, we have a need for people really sitting between the AI and the software part. Here, I think this is where potentially there will be a very big acceleration for many reasons. We can come back to that, but also with the Gen AI part, which let's say require more and more of this kind of skill set. So yeah, all in all, I think the taxonomy is pretty good, as it really reflects this holistic talent transformation we have to operate in the big bank and organizations.
Thank you. And we had a question coming in from Simon Torrance on the chat, which picked up on a point that Noémie made, which was, what about the ethical and responsible AI talent? Evident does ingest this information, by the way, but we include it in the responsible AI or transparency pillar, the fourth pillar. So just in the same way we double click on AI researchers in the innovation pillar, we do that. We mimic those personnel somewhere else in the index. So I think that's a perfectly fair shout out. I also wanted to bring Catherine into the same conversation because, Catherine, you often look at organizations on a whole. And I was wondering if you could expand on the point that Noémie made on, what are the touch points between these people in this AI stack and the rest of the organization? And how is that potentially involving when you think about how all of the other heads of line or business or particular capability areas needs to understand where they plug into this growing and growing pool of people that are really implementing it on the ground?
Yeah, and that was kind of my reflection in that I think this looks like a very reasonable taxonomy that I'm seeing, where we're on the ground looking at technology org design, technology target operating models. I suppose the critical piece for me is, as you described, the interplay with control functions, other enabling functions, product owners, and how you drill down to articulate the AI skill, the data literacy, the change in behavior to work in quite a rapidly changing environment. So I think there is this piece, again, when I'm looking at the future technology function and trying to think about should AI activity be clustered in a center of excellence? Does it become embedded in kind of skills of the whole entire technology function? And then what skills and behaviors are required in the other kind of part of the broader enterprise target operating model to ensure that that data and AI literacy is paramount. So that's the big area of focus at the moment, the interplay, the kind of handoffs between teams. I think the AI agenda requires a whole host of new behaviors, collaborations, breaking down silos, focus on curiosity. It really does transform the skills agenda from a behavior perspective and a technical perspective.
I think that's a wonderful provocation, that as we get better defined on this and it grows in size or the density of the overall organization, a lot of things begin to break at the same time. So let's get into that. And I'm going to share a couple more nuggets from the talent report, more as a continuing a continuing platform for us to shift the discussion forward. Just in terms of trends, what's interesting is that when we do a sweep of the 50 banks in the index and we get to 112 AI workers across these four capability areas, it's very dynamic data in the fact that nearly 10,000 of those workers are net new within the last 6 months since the last index update. But what's the most startling finding is, despite that, the top 10 leaderboard has remained fairly static. And by that, I mean the top 10 banks displayed on the left-hand side of the chart here in terms of their overall share of this gigantic and growing AI talent pool remains the same in terms of composition and, in fact, in terms of rank order based on what we profiled back in November. And as we start to look at how that's changing based on individual job profiles, the overall share of the talent market specific to AI and banking represented by these top 10 banks produce some really staggering numbers. These 10 banks are responsible for 51% of those over 100,000 AI workers. The top three, JP Morgan Chase, Capital One, and Wells Fargo, represent nearly a quarter of the talent pool and almost 40% of open job listings. So put another way, if you put this on a size versus growth graph, those 10 big banks are continue to really push the envelope of moving up and right in the overall quadrant. But if we switch from leaders to outliers, we are beginning to see certain banks, particularly European banks such as Deutsche Bank and Santander, begin to jump very high on that growth analysis. And this is where I think the intersection between the data and the empirical evidence and what we're getting through expert interviews and anecdote really begins to inform our perspective. One of the best interviews that we had that informed the report was with Prem over at Capital One, who really underscored that these numbers have a potentially greater meaning, or they signal a different proxy. And I think by that, he meant that certain banks that are beginning to see sudden surges in their talent, that could be an indication for them getting their data act together. And a lot of banks need to get their data act together before they can fulfill their cloud ambitions, which really informs how various elements of the talent stack, particularly implementation, changes over short periods of time. So not for nothing, Deutsche Bank has been working with Google Cloud since back in 2020. And as they make more and more announcements with that cloud and data infrastructure growing in sophistication, we see parallel changes to their supporting AI hub out of India. Similarly, Santander, on a slightly different maturity curve, is announcing that their cloud-based platform, codenamed Gravity, is going to be finished as of the end of 2024 or at the latest in the first half of 2025. So we see a lot of announcements that seem to be driving a step change in the recruitment of talent at those banks that are simply coming up from behind on this very well-established, very mature group of leaders in the overall talent index. So with that context and, additional kind of situational awareness, I really want to dive into some of the unanswered questions that our research inspires. And I think I wanted to start by getting each of yours hot takes on that data that I just shared and how the talent pool is growing and maturing at different rates for different banks across the index. And I think the most interesting way to phrase this is that when we talk to our customers about the fact that implementation right now seems to be growing the fastest of any of those 4 capability areas, even faster than AI development, where people are hiring like crazy in, there are 3 kind of different perspectives to this. There's one camp, I'll call the optimists, that say that leading banks are ready to move very quickly to implementation of promising use cases. There's a second camp that we'd call the pessimist, where IT folks from past digital transformation efforts might be shamelessly padding their resume with AI keywords. And the third camp I'd call the realists are, banks like Deutsche Bank and Santander have been rapidly upgrading their data infrastructure, and they're supporting cloud-based architecture. And that is the prerequisite or the gating factor to do what leading banks among the top 10 are ahead of the pack on. So starting again with Noemi as a practitioner, where do you fall in terms of those different perspectives right now?
I think indeed the way we see the AI talents pockets evolving really gives a good signal in terms of maturity, again, as a holistic enterprise transformation. I was discussing with a AI native company a couple of days ago, and the CEO was telling me, there is no difference anymore between your data architecture strategy, your cloud strategy, and your AI strategy. It's pretty much becoming the same. And I think it's an interesting way to think about it, because indeed, I think if I go back to the beginning of our AI journey in Société Générale 2016, maybe, we were gathering people because the objective was really and notably gathering data scientist people, because the objective was really, to touch the services, build the models, build more advanced model and so on. But very early, we realized that where we were able to scale, this was the places where we already had the right data infrastructure or the right data and IT architecture in order to be able to scale. And where we did not manage to scale, very often it was not because the model was not working, it was because the whole environment, or in terms of risk management, or in terms of IT and data infrastructure, was not ready. So I agree on this topic about, let's say, global readiness or AI readiness that you need in order to be able to really scale. And I think when you start to recruit people specialized within AI implementation, I see it like a signal of that you have overcome a new step in maturity. So I will be maybe between the 1 and the 3, in the scenarios where you were elaborating. Another thing I think is very, very important, if you again think about it holistically, is also I would say, and building on what Catherine was saying as well, the business drive that you had on AI. How much your senior leader are AI savvy enough to really be able to drive this holistic transformation, so that the people that you hire in terms of delivering your AI use cases are really not only enabled in terms of the environment in which they are operating, but also they are working on the really game-changing topics or use cases or strategic focus area in order to bring value and to have the means in order to be able to really deliver at scale. So I think this is also a signal when you look at the workforce on AI trends. It's also a signal of the top management's, let's say, AI savviness and willingness to accelerate, which is a key enabling force, I think, for the talents.
And Catherine, you work with a wide range of partners and customers, at a diverse stage of different maturities in their AI journey. So I'm interested in kind of what are the top concerns or what are the frustrations when they're just looking at the sheer number of people or bodies being thrown at the problem, and how they even determine how much of each capability they need to compete with or do what's right for their own ambitions, divorced from what's going on in the wider ecosystem.
Yeah, I think there's definitely, I suppose, an increasing number of barriers. So if I look at some of the CIO conversations I'm privileged to be in, the governance frameworks, the governance structures aren't keeping pace with the pace that they want to take the kind of AI agenda forward. There's a lack of appetite from control functions to invest time up front to think about how they control in a different way. There's dynamics where you've got kind of group structures, regional structures, different product lines, different product owners. So to me, there's a definite barrier over what to prioritize and then what that demand looks like over the longer term, and therefore what capability is absolutely needed. I think I'm seeing very early stages of my clients trying to become more mature in how they prioritize, where they will put effort, how they better articulate demand, and then how they can translate that back to what capability is needed, where, when, in what location, at what cost.
And I want to talk about, I think it's important, what I want to address an unanswered question in the research is that what I just went through kind of depicts the current state of play, or a snapshot in time in a rapidly changing environment. And so I think the question for both of you, and I'll ask it in a different way, is basically in terms of the demand supply imbalance in AI talent as it exists right now facing bankings, what is coming next down the pipeline that could exacerbate that, and how do you get ahead of that problem? And I'll start with Amy, and ask you if you agree with something that we heard from other interviews that were featured in the report, which is that there's two approaches to this. One of which is to hire increasing specialization, a Gen AI engineer or adding Gen AI to a particular title, versus beginning to think of a lot of the specializations more in terms of how that same person will be deployed first in Gen AI, and then what comes after that, whether that's foundational models or agentic AI systems, et cetera, and trying to map out the life cycle of what contribution that person will be doing outside of what is the bright, shiny object that is captivating the media's attention and the industry's attention in the next 6 to 12 months, and trying to change kind of that horizon a little bit, push that horizon out. Does that resonate with you?
Yeah, absolutely. I think really the starting point has to be what Catherine was describing, this prioritization process. So you have to be very clear about which are the areas where you really want to deeply invest within, because you really think that you will get value of it. And actually, you are in banking, so the business is pretty complex. It's very regulated. So you will need people that not only master the cutting edge AI technology, but also people that master pretty well, or at least have an advanced ability to communicate and enroll the business owner that will be the sponsor of the use cases you want to deliver. So if you want to have this balance, it becomes even more complicated, because the scarce resources, let's say top AI resources, are scarce, but the top AI resources with an ability and a willingness to work in a regulated environment, complex environments, are even more scarce. So this is why I think you can think about it in terms of profiles, so saying, okay, do I want to hire a very high specialist of generative AI? Or you can think, and this is more what we are doing in Société Générale, by skills, saying, okay, here is what I want to do. Here is the resources that I have. What are the skills I miss? And on which part it's so urgent and I have a massive need of it for a long period of time where it's worth it to hire a specialist, or in which parts, let's say the LLM, to take this example, is only the extra mile that will make an already existing traditional AI use case at scale and with even more impact. And here, maybe the best strategy is to upskill my current AI teams on this specific skill, and I will more invest on very specific and very top-notch upskilling programs. So this is a bit the balance, and I think, again, to take the right decision, your best chance to do it is really to be very clear on your strategy and the pace also you need to gather the different kind of expertise, and on which expertise you can wait a bit or maybe borrow, and which expertise you really need it right now and you really need to hire a person right now.
I think that was an incredible articulation of a rational approach to a really complicated problem. And so that's why I want to bring in Catherine to talk about building a skills-based culture. Why does this seem so logical and rational on paper, but difficult in terms of execution? And maybe one of the things to respond to is another thing we heard out of our interviews that informed the report was that hiring for an open role is entirely different than hiring or cultivating, a set of skills in the way that Noémie was just describing. And that comes into conflict often in the fact that while they might be housed in the same organization, HR as it relates to recruitment versus career development and training are two very different and complementary disciplines that aren't always in lockstep or aren't always as closely coordinated as they could be. Your thoughts?
Yeah, so if I think about those clients that I work with that I think are doing well in this space, they've transitioned away from thinking about job roles, job profiles, and moved to a focus and a prioritization of skill. So I suppose the buzzword is kind of how do they become a skills-based organization, of which AI skills is a big component of that. But that is a fundamental shift if you think about the people architecture, the HR frameworks, the complex job taxonomies, the role profiles, the very long job descriptions, very technically written for many technologists. But there are many, I suppose, building block steps to becoming a skills-based organization. So we're on the ground in a couple of the banks looking at their maturity of becoming a skills-based organization. Have you got a skills baseline on which to assess capability? Have you used skills inferencing as a proxy to do at pace your current state assessment? Where are you prioritizing effort because you've got sophisticated methodologies around identifying future demand over a longer time horizon? Many of my clients are very good at resource planning, looking at the 12-month cycle. They've got a corporate plan, they've got a hiring plan, but when you try to enable line managers to articulate demand over the next 3 to 5 years, they really struggle. And you need that demand plan to then think about capability. Similarly, you want to look at the composition. Where might it be a prudent approach to bringing contingent or third party or outsourcing because you need a surge of skill to meet demand, but that might not be a long-term solution because there's knowledge transfer risks and key person dependencies if your composition is very geared to contingent. So to me, I think there's the need to articulate the skills dependency over what demand, what sourcing strategies do you need, where could you use talent intelligence to tap into different global talent pools, but all anchored to skill, not job now. And I think there's varying degrees of sophistication across the banks that I work with, but all absolutely have the same ambition.
Yeah, and we're getting peppered right now in chat with a lot of questions about sourcing and where you find these people and how you balance the different channels and how you look at this externally versus internally. So we're going to move very quickly there with regards to transitioning from talent capability to talent development. But one last question before we do that I think is important, and I wanted to bring in Alexandra on this because it's a loaded question, but I've seen her talk on stage about this, is the overriding question is, based on the numbers that we just presented from the evident report, do you think a late mover can catch up with the leaders in these continuing talent wars? Or is it just going to continue the bifurcation that we've seen in the early innings of what is a long and impactful journey to kind of the whatever we're defining as the AI transformational moment down the road.
Yeah, I mean, I think, I mean, it's, I mean, what we hear, and thanks, Colin, for the question, is, you know, one thing is to buy in, and we're talking specifically about Gen AI, to buy in the capabilities. You sort of look at, do we need an OpenAI or Mistral or Cohere? What other capabilities do we need to, you know, to invest in? That's sort of, as someone expressed the other day to us, that's sort of 10% of the problem, right? The 90% of the problem is all of the structural elements, such as the talent. And Noemi, you mentioned, you know, the data in, you know, the cloud and the, you know, data strategy and all of that. So that's sort of all in one. And to move that takes time, and to restructure that, and to, you know, to get your data architecture to a place where you know, where it needs to be in order to implement your, you know, and adopt AI. That's sort of really the long, hard slog. And that is something that we know many banks that are sort of really sort of, you know, the fast followers, or those that are catching up, as we describe in the index, are thinking about, is there an advantage to wait, right? Costs of these models are going to come down, right? We're seeing that cost compression happening. So that's good. The reliability and the capability of the large language models are improving. So there is you know, so there is this question around, is it a good idea to wait maybe 12 months for those costs to come completely down and the reliance going up? But I think what we're then also hearing is that there is no time to waste to get all of the other aspects in place, right? You've got to get the talent pipeline moving. You've got to think about your, you know, how you prioritize. Noemi, you were also mentioning the sort of the maturity of a bank. It's also when it comes to its ability to, you know, to prioritize and know how to prioritize what to go for, and identify what problems lie in the bank already in terms of the structural changes that need to be made. And those need to be addressed head on and sort of right away. So there is a risk in waiting. So I guess that's a sort of a long-winded, and I'd love to hear what Catherine and Noemi think about, you know, is there a second mover advantage, or is there in fact a risk in waiting, maybe, you know, 6, 12, 18 months to sort of start making these changes?
Yeah, if I can elaborate, I fully agree with what you were saying, Alexandra. I think what can wait is the tactical part. What cannot wait is the strategic part. So you will have to work in any case on your prioritization process. You will have to work in any case on your AI governance setup and all the upskilling also, as we are talking about talents of your control functions. You will have to invest in any case in your operating model in general, so meeting your people, your tools, and your organization. These are no regret moves, but the earlier you start, the better, because it takes time. And I think it takes time in any organization, even if you want to accelerate. I think where there is potentially a bet to take to wait a bit is really on acquiring capabilities, being very top-notch talents, or being a specific model. If you want to have to design a model strategy, I think if you are not already very advanced with already a couple of internal models pretty advanced, and there might be an interest to well. But all the strategic part and the foundational part, I would say the structural part of the work, I think it's a long journey, and I would say that it's a no regret move to invest on that part.
And I would be in violent agreement. And if I think about outside of the technology function, I would be prioritizing broader AI upskilling in readiness for technology moving at pace. So I think that AI literacy, new development of leadership capabilities to navigate the human and the machine, absolutely, I would not be waiting for.
Excellent. So I'm going to move us forward from talent capability to talent development. And, you know, switching gears, I do want to focus on just sourcing and channel strategy for the incoming talent that we're talking about. And I think I wanted to connect this also with, there's a EY runs these talent pulse polls on a regular basis. And the last one that was more focused on the technology industry than the banking industry really resonated with what we're hearing from clients. And it's seemingly paradoxical, is that 50% of business leaders expect a combination of both layoffs and hiring to be a direct result of AI adoption. But that said, 3 in 5 business leaders say that AI has made it more difficult for them to source talent at the same time. And as the chat is really revealing, people are really curious in like, what is the mix of where this huge body of rapidly growing talent is coming from? And so this is kind of evidence take on an empiric approach as opposed to a survey approach, which is that when we look at the experience that preceded the person joining the bank, we found that 60% of this talent is coming directly from university, and 2/3 of those from advanced programs. About 20% is being sourced from another sector, predominantly technology or consulting firms, reinforcing that revolving door between vendors and partners. And about 15% originates from other banks, or just that intra-industry poaching that inevitably happens as people become more and more experienced. And if you plot this on kind of a 2x2 grid, it's just interesting to see the diversity of strategies that are in play across the 50 banks and across all of the regions that they represent. So you can profile an individual bank on this as if they're at the lower left-hand quadrant in quadrant A. They're hiring predominantly from university. The farther you go from the right, the more they're hiring from other banks. The more you go vertically on the chart, the more they're hiring from adjacent industries. And if you're in that upper right-hand quadrant, that's not necessarily a desirable quadrant, but it means that you are hiring more experienced people from a mix of in industry and out of industry than you are that fresh talent out of university. And so the main point of the chart is not that there's a one-size-fits-all solution to this problem. It's that different banks are finding different ways to achieve the numbers that they need to implement AI transformation strategy. And not for nothing, SocGen is at the exact center of that chart, on par with index average. There you have one of the more diverse set of channel and sourcing strategies of a lot of the banks kind of represented, which speaks something to the correlation between the ability to accelerate on volume and that diversity of who you're bringing in. But a lot of people have defined this as being in the eye of the storm, because eventually, with as many organizations, not only in banking, but across the Fortune 500 and beyond, competing for the same talent, eventually we're not going to need to stop looking externally and look internally to how we really upskill the organization as a whole. And I think that is where a lot of people's time and energy is focused, and what has been referred to on this call earlier is getting to the heart of the strategy for what people are trying to pull off. And so I'm going to move immediately into question time. But what we heard is that the challenge that a lot of our banks and our customers are having is the fact that when you look internally to that strategy and how you're going to develop talent, it's not one thing that you have to do. It's keeping in balance several things that you have to do, which involve at least four things at a minimum, which is long-term workforce planning. So take away that myopic short-term view, which we've already discussed earlier in the call with regards to capability. And then look at things in terms of who are the builders, who are the leaders, who are the users, and figure out how to do training and career development for all three of those stakeholders very, very well. And that can involve group-wide onboarding for all that great technical talent coming out of university. It can involve ensuring that people in leadership are role modeling certain behaviors from the top down to help everybody talk about AI in terms of the same language and prioritization. And as use cases come to fruition, to really ensure that people are rapidly adopting those new tools and applications and that they're aware about them, and that they're aware about the return on the investment, the impact on their work, and they're not afraid of that tool or application taking their job or challenging how things have conventionally been done in PowerPoint and Excel land. But keeping all of those things in focus and in sync at the same time is, I think, the big challenge for as we approach the next index update, in who can juggle, keep all these plates spinning at the same time. So, with that, going back to the fact that SocGen is in a very advantageous place on that quad chart. Noemi, how did you guys get there? How do you think about your sourcing strategy? Is what I presented too simplistic a view of that? What are some areas where the bank has been really successful at establishing reliable pipelines, and what partnerships or tools or strategies or governance structures did you have to invest in to really ensure that all of those things were firing on all cylinders?
Yeah, so no, I think the analysis is really interesting. So the way I would answer is to say, okay, whatever the profile you want to hire or to recruit or to keep within your organization, because I won't oppose a hiring strategy and an upskilling strategy. There is a couple of things that everyone will be looking for. So you will need to have a very strong business drive. So that means that you need to invest first in upskilling the senior leader and the people who are going to make the decision, because if you want to be attractive for an external candidate or for an internal candidate, they need to be convinced of the fact that their job will have an impact. So here we have invested pretty much. Actually, we have had a very disciplined way of training all our senior leaders for a couple of time. And actually, this is a continuum between digital, data, and AI. So AI is kind of the third step, of an overall digital and data upskilling strategy that we've carried on for a couple of years ago now, starting by the board of administrators, then going to the exco, then going to the top leaders. So here we rely on very well-known partners. So we have a certified programs, for example, for top managers with Harvard Business School and so on. So in order to really have very digital data and AI savvy top leaders, which are able to be these role models and to give impact to the project. Then what your people will look for is, I would say, an attractive workplace environment. So they will need the right tool. They will need to be able to be involved in research. So this is also something for our AI experts. Something that we are really investing on is to keep a very strong link with the academic work. We have people, for example, on model risk supervision, who are really keen to contribute to this research we have on explainability of the models and so on. So here we give time also to the people to be able to publish and to be part of these works. And we welcome some interns, some PhD in order to benefit from external research as well. We have this partnership also with Artifacts Research Lab. So a couple of partnerships very strong in order, to let's say, bring this intellectual interest to our AI expert. Then you will need to implement this continuous learning mindset. I mean, this is also a population, the experts or the AI tech savvy people we are talking about, which are very, it's very important for them to upskill in any time and to be able to contribute. So the link with the open source ecosystem is also something which is very attractive, and which is also something that, it's hard for banks to compete, because when you work in a big tech, it's very easy to be full open source. When you work in a bank, it's not exactly the same story. So we have to invent ways so that it can become a reality at the same time, And then potentially what you need also is to benefit from diversity. So we try to have a diverse approach in recruitment, in upskilling, and also to leverage the different geographical footprint that we have, because it can offer also different talent pools. So this is also something which is linked to the offshoring strategy you are thinking about, that we try to build strong links also between the different teams geographically, so that we can have a very active and lively data science community for them to be able to share about the use case, share about the techniques. And it's also a way to answer to your points, to say when you really need very scarce skills, how do you manage if you just need maybe 25% of one FTE to do it, but maybe we can leverage on your broader that internal open source community. So this is some examples of the actions we have tried to put in place in a pretty structured way in order to guarantee an attractive environment for these scarce talents, even if we operate in a regulated and with a certain legacy environment.
Excellent. And I'd also point attendees to, there's a very helpful asset in the report that actually identifies recent examples of successful training and development initiatives at the bank level, linking not only to a description of kind of the what, why, and the how of the program, but actually where the program was documented in public-facing literature. Because we know that a lot of people are doing these things, but not very good at talking about them. And sometimes talking about them can help create a virtual cycle in attracting people to your organization in the first place. So I'm getting ahead of myself. A lot of that will be in the leadership report. But to kind of conclude our thoughts on talent, Catherine, I wanted to link kind of some of the next questions with what's coming over chat is, are these persona types, leaders, builders, and users, is that enough, or are we missing out on some particular stakeholder groups? And more importantly, are there organizational structures or innovation processes that help, again, keep what you're doing with regards to each of these groups in balance, in harmony, and advancing in lockstep with one another?
Yeah, and I think I just started. I think, Naomi, what you just articulated there to me was, there's a question on the chat about employee brand. I think you're clearly good at sourcing the talent, but it's how do you then retain that talent? And to me, what you described there was a very compelling employee value proposition, a deal that once you've sourced the AI talent, they want to stay with you because there'll be others looking to attract your talented individuals, but you're describing that the environment in which they are working is pertinent to them making an impact, which I think is very, very important. I think the leadership buy-in piece is the kind of missing piece of the jigsaw. I think technology functions, AI functions are already looking at new ways of working and more sophisticated methods to prioritize capability, but I've been increasingly in senior stakeholder meetings where there's a bigger desire that those leaders embrace the AI agenda, and I suppose they themselves are needing to become more technologists as they kind of need to become more sophisticated themselves to buy in and to make some of those investment and prioritization decisions. So I think that, again, those organizations that I'm working with are thinking more holistically around, this is not just the technology function, it's not just the control functions, it's actually senior leadership teams really buying in and getting behind those AI individuals that want to push forward on what is quite a bold agenda.
So we're at kind of the 5-minute warning, and we're going to conclude with a little bit of housekeeping, but I have one lightning round for everybody. And obviously, Alexandra always has some tough questions that aren't always on my list. But my lightning round question is, we're talking about things that are not easy to implement, and I think that with regards to the challenge with talent is fairly slow moving, and it takes really constant iterative investments to get from where you are to where you want to be as an enterprise. But a lot of people on the call are looking for kind of immediate action items. So from both of your perspectives and Alexandra's, starting tomorrow, if you're not on that top 10 list, what can a bank do on Wednesday morning to start moving ahead on some of these collective challenges that are shared across all of the industry and all of the practitioners that are on the line today?
Well, I think Catherine had the right first action, which is really to build that business leadership drive. I think this is really the first thing, because everything then is coming from that first step. So I think that my advice would be not to let's say to try to ride the wave of hiring a lot of experts and so on, because if you do not have the whole environment ready to welcome and to really empower them to be performing, you will hire people, but you won't be able to keep them, or you will hire great people, but you won't be able to get the right impact from their work. So I would really invest on the senior executive upskilling, and then I will really invest on the structural foundations in terms of governance, prioritization governance, framework governance, and then a global, let's say, strategic workforce planning and career path management for experts. Because if you do not think about it from day one, the risk is that you will have a lot of good people for a short period of time, and you won't be really able to go so much further than the POC, which is not what we are looking anymore.
Excellent.
I would just add that I think understanding your skills baseline now. So how could you at pace identify individuals that could have the potential or the aptitude to become AI proficient? Because you may not need not to source everything externally, and there could be high potential individuals that you are overlooking. So again, there are very few of my clients that think once they've identified their demand that they will be able to meet that demand on their current headcount. So how do you become more creative, drive individuals in teams to be curious, to be innovative, to have that growth mindset, to acquire new skills, and push that accountability to kind of your workforce whilst you're navigating what your kind of sourcing strategies need to be and what your long-term demand is.
Excellent. I think that's
Yeah,
sage
and that's
advice.
true that we did not elaborate too much on that point, but that's true that the reskilling part of it, we talked about hiring, we talked about skilling, we did not talk too much about reskilling. Once it's true that in banking, you have a lot of people who have a very strong banking knowledge, which were great project leader or project manager that could, let's say, invest a couple of weeks to really, let's say, raise a lot their AI knowledge in a short period of time in order to now be able to be very, very good AI business owners, for example, of this kind of roles, which are really pretty instrumental in delivering the AI strategy. So this is also an important message. And this is also some stuff that we have invested a lot on the last 2 years to reskill traditional product manager into AI business owner, because we really needed this deeply business anchored workforce to drive the project.
Excellent.
I know we're out of time, Colin, but maybe just I just wanted to add to that. A lot of the things that we track are not necessarily all in the talent pillar when it comes to talent attraction, right? As we heard from Catherine and Noemi, there's like this war on talent is not easy to source. You've got to look at what you have in the bank and see where you can, reskill or retrain inside the bank. But things like we see that AI talent looks also for a place where they can publish research, right? That there's an IC track that they can go to conferences, they can write papers that go into sort of the greater ecosystem of AI research. So allowing that activity at the bank is also really important for that talent attraction. And then one can wonder whether there is a correlation between not having those aspects and reskilling and sort of AI development activities. And we track the poaching activity by the banks as well. So we could wonder whether there might be a link between not having those activities and being a bank that's sort of more sort of prominently or more poached than others. But I know we've reached, Colin, the end of, and by the way, just wanted to flag, there's a really good question also, there are many good questions in the chat, but Usman is flagging this question around linking your AI research teams or AI teams to the lines of business and sort of how you work out that balance between what you have centrally, how you use that across the banks, so you and the banks that are sort of very federated in their decision making, and sort of how you bring that to the central part of the bank so you don't risk the duplication. I think that's another really big topic. But I don't know, Colin, should I just close off with some of the housekeeping here? I know we've gone 1 minute over, but maybe just quickly to say that we've got next up is our leadership report, where we look at the narrative and the executive composition of a bank, and looking at that narrative and how that's being expressed, and the banks that are sort of talking about the spend and ROI and use cases and so on, sort of really double clicking on that and looking at that in depth. And that's coming up as our next report. And the index update will refresh in October. We're also looking at, as many here know, our outcomes benchmark, where we will be looking to do a report in the fall at some point. And then if you want to keep up to date on everything that we do, please do sign up to our brief. That is our newsletter that anyone can access. And last but not least, really a huge thank you to Catherine and Noemi for a great discussion. And it is recorded for those who want to catch this again and hear again what all of the great things that were discussed. And not least, Colin, to your fantastic management of the discussion and the run through of an enormous body of work distilled into a few slides. And I'll hand over to you to do the closing.
Yes, and we covered a lot of ground in 60 minutes, but a huge thank you to Catherine and Naomi. I learned so much in the last hour, and so we really appreciate your time and your contributions, and also to great questions from the audience. Thank you for taking an hour out of your day to catch up with Evident, and we'll see you for the next report, the next webinar, and the symposium in New York. Bye, everybody. Thank you.